You think you're the master of the world? Try turning off the lights and face the monster that hunted your ancestors for 2 million years. But we didn't run. We turned that fear into our greatest weapon. That's why, when the lights go out, you're still here.
The sun is dipping below the horizon of the African savanna, painting the sky in colors that feel too beautiful for the terror they usher in. You are not a warrior. You are not a king. You are just a fragile, hairless creature, huddled in the dirt with your kin, trying to make yourself small. You listen. You don't hear the wind. You hear the snap of a twig 50 paces back. Don't see the grass swaying. You see 2 predatory eyes igniting in the shadows, waiting for your fire to blink. Your heart is hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. You are not the top of the food chain tonight. You are, quite literally, just another meal on the menu. You hold your breath, clutching a cold stone, praying to a god that hasn't been named yet, wondering if you will see the dawn. Then, you look at the embers. You realize you have a choice to make. Do you wait for the dark to claim you, or do you stand up and fight back? Let's rewind. Not just a few centuries. Forget your empires, your cities, your steel. Go back 2.5 million years. You're standing on the Pliocene landscape. It's vast, it's brutal, and if we're being honest, you have absolutely no business being here. Look at your hands, no talons, no razor-sharp claws to rip and hide. Look at your feet, soft, flat, pathetically slow. You aren't built to outrun a gazelle, and you certainly aren't built to stand your ground against a predator that weighs half a ton. By every biological metric, you are a walking, talking mistake. You are the prey. You are the snack. Think about the world you're inhabiting. It isn't the world of the lions you see on nature documentaries today. It's worse. You're sharing this land with Pachacrauda, a hyena the size of a modern lion, with jaws so absurdly powerful they can crack an elephant's femur like it's a dry twig. Imagine that sound. Crack. That's the sound of bone giving way to sheer, prehistoric force. That could be your femur. And then there are the saber-tooths, Smilodon. Imagine teeth, real, serrated knives, nearly a foot long, designed for one singular purpose, to sever arteries with surgical, terrifying precision. They don't play with their food. They don't want a fair fight. They want a clean, efficient kill, and they have been evolving for millions of years to be the ultimate death machine. Meanwhile, you're just soft. Your brain is still a work in progress. You don't have fire. You don't have complex tools. You don't even have a language to warn your brother that death is stalking him from the tall grass. You are slow, you are defenseless, and you are arguably the most vulnerable creature on the savannah. How then are you still here? How did your ancestors manage to survive long enough to pass their genes down to you? It's tempting to look back and imagine them as rugged, Stone Age superheroes, casually wrestling lions with spears. But that's a myth. That's a bedtime story we tell ourselves to feel better. The reality was much bleaker. It was a game of numbers, a game of pure, unfiltered terror. Consider the prey lifestyle. Every day, you have to go to the waterhole. But the waterhole isn't a sanctuary, it's a death trap. Every predator, from the giant crocodiles lurking beneath the surface to the massive cats prowling the reeds, knows the same thing. If you wait, the food will come. Walking to the water was essentially walking into a buffet line where you were the main course. So why didn't they go extinct in the first 100,000 years? It wasn't because they were strong. It wasn't because they were fast. It was because they started to realize something fundamental. They realized that their only hope of survival was to stop acting like individuals and start acting like a unit. They figured out the geometry of life. When you're alone, you're dinner. But when you're in a group, the predator's calculus changes. It doesn't see a meal anymore. It sees a risk. It sees a chaotic, screaming, rock-throwing nightmare that might cost it a broken leg or a blind eye. And in this world, a minor injury is a death sentence. A predator that can't hunt can't eat. And if it can't eat, it dies. They weren't fighting because they were brave. They were fighting because the math of survival told them they had to. They stayed close. They watched the shadows. They learned slowly and painfully that the ones who stood together, the ones who moved as a single twitchy, hyper-aware body, were the ones who saw the sunrise. You are the descendant of the survivors. You are the product of millions of years of near misses, of close calls in the dark, and of a relentless, stubborn refusal to be eaten. You didn't survive because you were strong. You survived because, against all odds, you refused to let the darkness win. But this was only the beginning. The real, terrifying shift in the power dynamic was still waiting in the wings. They were about to discover the one thing that would turn them from the menu into the monster. Sometimes history doesn't just tell you a story. Sometimes it leaves a crime scene. In 1924, a skull was pulled from a limestone quarry in Taung, South Africa. It was small, delicate. It belongs to Lepithecus, who had lived nearly 3 million years ago. Scientists flocked to it. They wanted to know about human origins, about the missing link. But when they looked closer, they didn't just find a human ancestor. They found a victim. Look at the eye socket. Right there on the upper rim. 2 puncture marks, perfectly spaced. It's chilling, isn't it? When you hold that skull, you aren't holding a scientific specimen anymore. You're holding the physical evidence of a murder. Paleontologist Raymond Dart realized it first. He saw the pattern. The damage didn't come from a rock slide. It didn't come from a falling tree. It came from the sharp, lethal canine of a large raptor, likely an eagle, or perhaps a leopard. Think about the scene. A mother turns her head for a split second to forage. The child is just 3 years old. He's curious, maybe a bit distracted. Then death drops from the sky or lunges from the canopy. There was no struggle. There was no defense. It was over in a heartbeat. This little skull is the Taung child, and it is the most honest thing we have in our fossil record. It strips away our pride. It reminds us that for the vast majority of our history, we weren't the ones walking around with our chests puffed out. We were on the menu. We were just another creature occupying the same space as the truly dominant predators of the Pliocene. We tend to look at evolution as this grand upward march. We imagine a steady climb toward brilliance. But look at this skull again. Look at those holes. Does that look like an upward march to you? No, that looks like vulnerability. The Taung child didn't leave behind a grand legacy. He left behind a tragedy. And yet, he is the reason we know the truth. He is the witness. He tells us that the world was a meat grinder, and that our ancestors didn't have the luxury of arrogance. They lived in a landscape of fear where every rustle in the leaves could be the end of the line. When you look at this fossil, don't see a primitive ape man. See a child who never got to grow up. See the reality of the struggle. See the reason why, eventually, we had to get smarter. Because if you were going to survive in a world that saw you as nothing more than a snack, you had to stop being prey. The Taung child was the cost of that lesson. We learned it in blood. Millions of years of blood. You're still sitting there, in the dark, clutching that stone. You're shivering, not just from the cold, but from the realization that something out there is watching you. You're waiting for the end. But then you do something your ancestors had been flirting with for eons. You strike a spark, catches on dry grass, whoosh. In that moment, the world changes. The darkness, which had been a private hunting ground for every apex killer in the savannah, suddenly pulls back. For the first time, you have a boundary. You have a 30-foot circle of flickering orange light that says, "Not here." Think about the psychology of that predator. A leopard, a master of stealth, a creature that thrives on the element of surprise, now has its eyes blinded by the glare. It hates the crackle of wood. It hates the scent of smoke. Millions of years of evolutionary training have harnessed a simple screaming instruction into its brain. Fire is bad. Fire is unpredictable. Fire is death. When you sit by that fire, you aren't just warm. You are untouchable. You can finally sleep. For the first time in your lineage, you can close your eyes for more than a few minutes without the primal fear that you'll be a corpse by sunrise. You start taking shifts. Someone watches the embers. Someone watches the dark. You're building a security system made of heat and light. And while you're sitting there, listening to the embers pop, you realize something else. This isn't just about survival. It's about energy. You throw a piece of meat into the flames. It doesn't just taste better. It changes everything. Cooking is, quite literally, pre-digestion. Your gut doesn't have to work as hard, which means your body can redirect that massive amount of energy to your brain. You're fueling your own intelligence with a simple burning branch. But fire was only half of the equation. You had to learn how to move. You still weren't the fastest thing on the savannah. A cheetah could still outrun you in a blink. A hyena could still tear you apart. But you had a secret weapon that nature hadn't quite perfected in any other mammal. You were a sweating, long-distance machine. Most animals run in bursts. They sprint, they catch, they pant, they overheat, they collapse. If a lion chases a gazelle and doesn't catch it within a minute, it's game over. The lion has to stop or risk dying of heat stroke. But you don't have to be faster. You just have to be relentless. You learn to permit hunt. You would spot a herd, pick one out, and simply start walking. Or jogging. You'd keep the pace up for hours. In the midday heat, while the predators were gasping for breath in the shade, trying to dump their internal heat through panting, you were still moving. You were sweating. You were shedding heat like a radiator. You would track them until they were shaking, until their legs gave out, until they simply couldn't stand anymore. You weren't hunting with fangs. You were hunting with time. You were turning their own biology against them. You were proving that in the long run, speed is a trap, and endurance is the only thing that actually matters. It was a bizarre, ugly, and undeniably effective way to survive. It was the birth of the human as a machine. By mastering the light and mastering the long road, you didn't just survive the savannah. You began to reshape it. You weren't a victim anymore. You were a problem, a slow-sweating, fire-wielding, persistent problem that the predators of the world couldn't solve. The game had shifted. The menu was starting to hunt the cook. You've learned how to keep the fire. You've learned how to run until you're exhausted. But there is one final piece to the puzzle. Something that makes predators tremble more than any claw. It's not a weapon, it's memory. Imagine yourself as a solitary creature in the vast wilderness. If you don't know that a leopard is stalking the eastern valley, you'll die the moment you step foot there. Your life ends, and that blood-bought experience, something more valuable than gold, is buried alongside your bones. That is how the natural world has operated for millions of years. He who does not know dies. Humans, we were different. We bent that rule by inventing the most invisible yet powerful technology, social connection. Look at what archaeologists found at Dmanisi, Georgia. They unearthed the skull of an old man, an individual who had survived for decades despite losing all his teeth and suffering severe bone injuries. In the world of lions or wolves, a creature that cannot hunt for itself is abandoned, or worse, devoured immediately. But here, at the campsite of our ancestors, this old man lived. He was fed, protected, and wrapped in the embrace of his community. This wasn't just simple compassion. It was a master-class survival strategy. When you nurture an elder, you aren't just feeding another mouth. You're preserving a living library. That toothless man could tell the children about how he narrowly escaped a cave bear during the dry season 20 years prior. He taught them about medicinal plants, about the leopard tracks hidden in the shadows, and about how to read the sky to predict the coming storm. Knowledge no longer died with the individual. It became a collective asset. We began building a biological internet through language. At Shanidar Cave, skeletons with healed wounds show that we cared for each other from very early on. We didn't just share food, we shared our understanding of the world. A group that knows the northern waterhole is dangerous during a waning moon will always outlive a group that has to experience that death themselves to learn the truth. Our strength lies in our ability to accumulate knowledge across generations. Each generation of humans didn't need to start from scratch. We stood on the shoulders of those who came before us. We passed down the maps of fear, the maps of safety, and the maps of opportunity. When someone spotted predator tracks, they didn't keep it to themselves. They would map it, describe it, or mimic it for the group. The entire community would instantly update its survival software. This is why we started to win. While the great beasts continued to hunt by innate instincts honed over millions of years, humans started hunting with tactical thinking passed down through heritage. We didn't just confront predators with our physical selves. We confronted them with a massive information network, a community where the death of one did not mean the loss of experience for the whole. We created a world where the intelligence of an individual is a grain of sand, but the intelligence of a community is an unstoppable iceberg. We became so dangerous that even the largest beasts couldn't understand why the prey they once chased had started to trap, lure, and systematically eliminate them. We were no longer the prey. We became the archivists of how to destroy what once threatened us. The darkness was no longer a terror of loneliness. It became a place where stories were told, where strategies were debated, and where the next generation was forged to become the new rulers. We didn't just survive, we started setting the new rules for this planet. And when everything was ready, when weapons, fire, and social cohesion converged, the greatest purge in Earth's history was about to begin. The predators who had dominated since the dawn of time had no idea they were facing something evolution had never prepared them for. We weren't just faster in intellect, we were more durable in connection. That was the ultimate human weapon. Let's travel back about 400,000 years, to the site of Schoningen, Germany. Here, the ground doesn't just hold bones, it holds a verdict. We don't find humans being gnawed on by wolves anymore. We find wooden spears, but these aren't just sticks. They are engineered, sharpened, hardened by fire, and weighted with the kind of physics that only a brain obsessed with survival could calculate. Something had clicked. We stopped waiting for the night to end. We stopped cowering in the trees. We started walking out into the open, carrying the one thing that no claw, no matter how sharp, could ever match: distance. Imagine a saber-toothed cat stalking through the brush. It's confident, it's hungry, it's spent millions of years perfecting the art of the ambush. It tenses its muscles, ready to explode into a sprint. But before it can even twitch, thwack, a spear bites deep into its chest. From 20 meters away, the predator doesn't even see the killer. It just feels the steel-tipped end of a new era. This was the beginning of the Great Purge. And it wasn't a fair fight. We didn't want a fair fight. We used fire to drive herds toward the cliffs. We used coordinated noise to turn the forest into a trap. We didn't just hunt for food. We hunted for security. We hunted for a world where our children could sleep without the ghost of a leopard in every shadow. And it worked. Look at the fossil record. Everywhere humans arrived, the piens started to vanish. The giants, cat lions, short-faced bears. They were the kings of the Pleistocene, survivors of ice ages and volcanic winters. But they couldn't survive us. They couldn't evolve to fight a species that didn't play by their rules. We were the ultimate invasive species. We weren't the strongest. We were the most adaptive. We turned every single one of our biological weaknesses into a design flaw that demanded a technological fix. Can't see in the dark. We made the sun. Can't fight the bear. We made the distance. Can't outrun the lion. We surrounded it. We became the thing that nightmares had nightmares about. For millions of years, the predators had been the protagonists of the story. They were the ones who dictated the pace, the ones who chose the time, the ones who decided who lived and who died. But we changed the genre. We turned the tragedy into a conquest. They never truly understood what they were fighting. They kept looking for fangs. They kept looking for claws. They never realized that the most dangerous weapon on the planet wasn't attached to a limb. It was attached to a thought. It was a spear thrown by a mind that was already planning the next one. We didn't just win, we cleaned the slate, and as the last of the great predators vanished into the dust of history, we stood alone at the top of the food chain, silent, watching, ready for whatever came next. Evolution had finally met its match. We were the architects of our own dominance, and we were only just getting started. So here we are, safe, in our locked homes, surrounded by walls with the light switch always within reach. You think you've left that ancient fear behind. You think you've outgrown the darkness, but have you? Why do you still feel that prickle on the back of your neck when you're walking alone at night? Why does your heart skip a beat at a sudden crack of a branch in the woods? You aren't being irrational. You aren't just imagining things. You are carrying the legacy of the survivors. For 2 million years, your ancestors didn't have locks. They didn't have doors. They had the dark, and they had the teeth of things that wanted to turn them into lunch. Every single one of your predecessors who didn't feel that jolt of fear in the shadows, they're gone, they were eaten. You are the descendant of the paranoid, the hyper-aware, the ones who listened to the wind because they knew something was hiding in it. That fear is not a flaw, it's an inheritance. It's an ancient software update that never got uninstalled. When you wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing for no reason, you're not having a breakdown. You're simply being a human. You're being who you were built to be. You're checking the fire. You're scanning for the leopard. You're making sure the circle is still holding. We conquered the planet. We wiped out the predators. We turned the night into a neon playground. But deep down, under all the layers of civilization and safety, we are still those small, trembling creatures huddled around a flickering flame. We didn't lose the night. We just learned to manage it. But the next time the lights go out and you feel that familiar cold grip in your chest, don't fight it. Don't call it a weakness. Thank it. It's the voice of every ancestor who fought, bled, and endured so that you could be here today, safe, warm, and dreaming in the dark. They are still with you. They are the reason you're still here. The darkness never truly goes away, and neither do we.